What's happening? Benton here. Got a few rainy days in SoCal, today being one of them. Although it's not raining at the moment. The forecast says it will be raining. Who knows? Who knows? Tomorrow's supposed to be the big day. And I'm sure everybody is tuning in for their old man weather report. Now, the major thing about rain in Los Angeles is I'm confined to my car for some extent. Although I was able to bebop around and get the blood flowing earlier this morning, and as many of you may know, I do go to sleep quite early in the afternoon, in the evening, and then I'm generally awake quite early as well. Although the daylight savings time has thrown a little bit of a monkey wrench into that, although not too much. And um, also, for the uninitiated, we never know when new folks may be stumbling into this particular corner of YouTube here in Alphabet, Google, YouTube's hell pit. In this heaven or hell realm that, as far as I can tell, is manifesting as a hell realm. Now, can I remember where I started before I went on that tangent? I believe I can. Now, back in the Nightmare Dystopia podcast days, since those were pre-recorded, I had the benefit of sitting in silence for 90 seconds when necessary to remember what in the world I was on about. What was I talking about? Weather. Oh, new folks. Uh, yeah, I'm attempting to train myself into doing more broad-based uh, soliloquies, discourses, because I am transitioned, almost entirely transitioned, not to another gender, but transitioned uh, out of the so-called truth community. A term I've coined to myself, by the way, a phrase that I coined, the so-called truth community, which I believe itself grew out of so-called 9/11 truth. Interestingly, oh, shout out to apparently an InfoWars reporter, since we're speaking about the so-called truth community, which immediately has conspiracy theory connotations. Shout out to a InfoWars reporter apparently murked in Austin, Texas, which used to be perhaps the safest large city in the United States. No longer. I myself have spent a great deal of time in Austin, as I have many other large cities, as a homeless person, right? Although I do have the benefit of living in my car. Oh, yes, that reminds me. Although the car is mainly only useful for getting quality sleep, which can be quite challenging to acquire, sleeping on the streets of a city. Daylight savings time, yes, altering my schedule to some extent. And I was about to bring up my chronic health issues, and I have received a great deal of healing, some of which are the result of my own discipline in overnight, over 3 years ago now, changing my lifestyle. I'm built like that. I guess I'm just lucky, right, folks? Or perhaps he's going third person. Perhaps he's a super high functioning retarded person, as I'm discovering more and more. And I believe we will get into those topics as well. I almost put the stream off for another hour because I realized that it was time for me to have my can of sardines. And then it's like, how am I going to digest my food properly at the advanced age of 49? if I go live and put some energy and bluster into a discourse. But here we are. But yes, the sleep has been quite deep and quite high quality for quite some time. What I'm noticing now is when I awaken, I feel like crap in my bones, and I believe that this is my body telling me, "Hey, man, while your mind is waking up, while your beautiful mind is booting up, how about you just lay here for 45 minutes to perhaps an hour and relax?" Now, due to my various practices, spiritual practices, discipline practices, disciplining of the mind, even if I do experience these racing thoughts upon awakening, how many of us have experienced those? I can remember uh, many years ago that I would have trouble falling asleep at night due to racing thoughts, and eventually, from practicing meditation, a formalized meditation, a practice of meditation over time, eventually it got to where I no longer had those racing thoughts that would prevent me from going to sleep. But then for several years, I noticed that I would oftentimes have the racing thoughts, which is, anxiety in some form, right? Um, Worry, anxiety, fear. Generally, that would happen upon awakening. Nowadays, I generally awaken and am peaceful and am at peace. Um, but even if the body is going through this physiological response, and I figured out years ago that in fact what happens is most of what we experience as anxiety, or at least I experience as anxiety, is in fact physiological first. It starts with the body, the state of the body, and then in response, the mind generates thoughts and ideas that match the physiological state, but that we actually, most of us, myself included in the past, viewed this backwards. We would view, oh, the situations and the thoughts that I'm having, these ponderances, uh, is causing the physiological responses. And I don't believe that to be the case. I believe it's actually the opposite. And I know how to breathe through that and such these days. So that's a thing going on. Now, I myself have the spirit of, let's get up, let's do some things, right? Let's get up and get things done. What does the day hold? What must be accomplished? So there is a bit of a process of training myself out of that, and just say, no, that what needs to be done is lie here and rest some more. That's what is needed. Yes, and a lot of physical healing is seems to be happening as a result. I don't know that I will ever truly get back to normal physically, whatever that means. Although, what a blessing to not be able to no longer be able to consume the standard American diet, especially vis-a-vis seed oils, right? And now apparently that's a thing in the news cycle. I do peruse some of the headlines, and I skim some of these news articles from time to time. Um, and in looking at some of the articles this morning, and I see the stock market, the markets have already been mentioned in the chat before the stream began. Um, I could, most days I could just read broad financial news and so-called economy news, which which is the topic of the live stream, which is Heaven or Hell Realm. Tenet number 3 involves the economy. What is the economy? Defining the economy more specifically. But I've found that I have an ability to decode the hidden language of these news articles. And I already called my shot with the cuts that are supposedly happening in the federal government. I said, well, considering that 1.12 trillion was paid directly to bankers for interest on the debt last year, to big banks, whatever money's cut from the federal government is going to go to bankers. I myself, I have no issue with the government being trimmed down. But the reality is, every dollar, I'm happy for every dollar that goes into the hands of a common American, member of the proletariat, because that's a dollar that's not going in the hands of a rich banker. And remember, folks, these people are so wealthy that 10 generations from now, their children won't have to work a day in their life, right? It won't be a thing. Meanwhile, I'm in Los Angeles, and because of how expensive it is to live, not just here, but everywhere, but surprise, surprise, I always seem to end up in the cool part of town for whatever reason, or at least one of the cool parts of town. And, particularly high rents around here for what you get. And the style of the day, people dress like they're homeless. These people are living, they're making $250,000 a year or more, many of them in this area. The gentrifiers, I mean, the working class is brown people who are, they've been homeowners for generations now, presumably here in the city and the county. I'm guessing. I don't really know, but um, hilarious though that this is how these people choose to dress, because it's just, it used to be back during in the Ozzie and Harriet days, an American exceptionalism and mom and apple pie, America, mom and apple pie, and the building up of the country, and a day's work for a day's pay, and the American dream idea of working hard to get ahead. It was a positive to be viewed as having enough money, to be able to live in a big fancy house and perhaps drive a Cadillac and have nice clothes, right? And all of these things. Whereas now, a lot of these people, being, these so-called Nepo babies, they're dressing like me, like no bullshit. In fact, so much so that if I'm not carrying the proper homeless accoutrement, right? And another potential upside of the car is not always having to carry all my worldly belongings with me. But people can't necessarily tell that I'm not one of these people that makes $250,000 a year. Right now, if they would look a little closer, the signs are there, certainly. But as we know, the general public is de facto insane, of course, number one. But then number two is certainly not known for their critical thinking skills. Meanwhile, imagine my chagrin speaking to you, and I've been tested by the government itself, been tested in the 99th percentile for skills that include critical thinking. How about you? In spite of my southern twang, right? And I am the smartest person that sounds the dumbest. I will put my name on that. But let's check in with the chat. Was that enough rambles to get the ball rolling? Uh, and I do have a bit of a story I want to tell as well. What's up, Skate and Destroy? Good to see you. Yeah, yeah, pretty pleased with the burning Tesla on top. I love it. I love it. Hey, what's up, Jessica? Miss Jessica in the house. Always good to see her around these parts. Shout out to 13 in the house. That's a number. I like it. Just don't touch the military industrial complex, please, says Carl. I don't know. We'll see. That does remind me of all the fear, because when Obama was elected president, I was still living in Arkansas. I had not yet left Arkansas. when he was elected in '08, still in the land of my birth. And I remember going into a pawn shop or some such. And, I had been studying politics and was just beginning to dip my toe into financial matters. And a bunch of good old boys, in the pawn shop, hooping and hollering about the prospect of Obama cutting defense spending. I said, listen, fellas, they're not cutting defense spending, especially not under Obama. This is not going to happen. And of course, I was proven correct that was not a thing that happened. But um, yeah, I had an experience the other morning, and this ties into what I was saying about typically I wake up in the morning and I feel that I'm able to just run through a brick wall, Kool-Aid man, oh yeah style, right? And as I'm, you know, further sliding into old age here, and I like being effectively 50. I'm one of the few Gen Xers. Well, although I am also, I've called Gen X out for being forever young, but I guess I myself also suffer from that, being that I am perpetually 18 in my brain. But I have to remind myself at times that I can't just run through every wall Kool-Aid Man style. As I was on the first of my morning walks a few mornings ago, and a bit out of my element, because of the daylight savings time change. It kind of fucked me up to some extent. Um, and I won't even speak on whether or not that should be gotten rid of, or why even have it in the first place. But I think my preference would be that I was able to maintain my schedule, as it were. But that's okay. We're almost adapted to the new one. The timing of the schedule, I should say. The Because as a an undiagnosed fake autistic person, I'm certainly into my routine. But so as I was walking, uh, collecting my cans and bottles, and also for exercise, of course, to further the healing, further assist the healing processes. Um, I came upon a gentleman, and I'm of course listening to my earbuds as I always am. And I passed a gentleman who was blocking the crosswalk with his automobile and had his door open, and in a major city, and was standing outside of his automobile. This could mean, who knows, this could be anything, right? So the standard move is just keep it moving, right? But then he tries to talk to me, and I'm reticent to remove the earbuds, and eventually he's persistent enough that I take out the earbuds, and he wants me to help him push his car. I guess his car is disabled in some way. Now, again, since my standard just spirit is Kool-Aid Man style smashing through a wall, right? My first instinct is to help, but then I remember, oh yeah, that's right. I've gained 15 pounds. I'm now barely not, barely maybe not underweight at 135 pounds, 5'10", 135 pounds. Based on the BMI chart, I'm maybe not medically underweight anymore after having been so for probably 3 straight years. And then and I'm still chronically ill. I'm still wiped out by about noon every day, just exhausted, right? Chronically fucking ill. I had to check myself and say, sir, I'm not able to help you in this moment. And I must put myself first in that way. Who knows what could have happened? And then, how many times have you ever attempted a team lift with one of these bozos? Or, part of my super high functioning retarded person, me being that, is I don't like this thing where a team of people, or we're going to just, and this is a very male thing, we're just going to rush and do a thing that can physically, injure any of us, but we're not going to talk about it beforehand and formulate a plan. We're just going to spring into action. It's like, absolutely not. I can remember being on jobs and just, oh, now we're going to rush over and the three of us are going to team lift, this heavy object. And I was always the one like, hey, fellas, how about we take 10 seconds and decide how exactly we're going to do this before we, throw our backs out. Right. But so now at effectively the age of 50 with these, my low body weight and these chronic illnesses, why it's like I have to remind myself not to help. And then, we get into the idea of how much I've been talking about Christ and Jesus and all of these ideas. And then, I can already see the dogmatic religion would attempt to use this to guilt trip me, right? Which can never be love, by the way. But to guilt me, like, oh, well, that person needed your help. Well, did they need my help, or was this a trap of the enemy to put me into a condition where I'm physically disabled, whether permanently or temporarily, because I observed the gentleman, because he ended up pushing the car himself all the way to a nearby gas station where on my morning route, I occasionally there's a few cans and bottles in the trash cans there. Although, and this probably says something about economics, at least one of the clerks I've observed, in fact, will regularly go out there and take the recycling for himself, and good on him. I mean, it's a smart thing to do. But so sometimes there's just nothing to be had for Mr. Benton here, which is okay. But I observed this. So before he made it over to the gas station, I'm already kind of thinking, and I'm in a little bit of a guilt just because it's like, yeah, I do want to help people, obviously, but I must put myself first. My mission must come first, right? But then I observe, I'm like, hey, there's a blue collar brown person at the fucking gas pump. He's like 6 foot, 230 pounds, in like a dicky suit on his way to work, just hanging out at the gas pump at, whatever, I don't 2:30 a.m., whatever time it was. Maybe he's getting off of work. I don't know. And so I'm thinking to myself, and I almost was like, hey, could you, because by then you could just see the guy pushing the car, on the road there. And it's like, hey, why don't you go help this guy? But he seemed like he had it at that point. And part of being a grown ass man is, I think, you know, we've all pushed a car by ourselves at some point, I'm assuming, grown ass men, you know. And I don't even mean the times we've assisted others or been assisted. I just mean like just by ourselves, pushed a car. So, it's a part of being a man, And but then I noticed that the guy, he pushed it to the driveway, and then he's not able to get it. Now he's blocking the driveway of the gas station. But I'm also in the back of my mind like, hey, is this some sort of trap? And then I see and also I'm good at reading people, and I don't know if this guy was on drugs or hadn't slept, but his eyeballs were like saucers, right? Something was going on with this dude, probably under demonic influence of various kinds, most likely. And I shouldn't laugh, but you know, laugh or cry, right? And the big brown person is still there, physically capable. And then I observe the car pusher is now talking to an old lady. Like, I don't know, is he trying to get her to help push the car? Which at this point, it's like a 45-degree angle up this fucking hill. Like, you're not pushing this thing up this hill anyway at this point. But at no point did he notice the large, physically capable 230-pound guy and go and approach him and say, hey, could you give me a hand? He's asking 135-pound Benton, 50-year-old Benton, instead of the 30-year-old who's looks like he could go play football, and big broad-shouldered guy. And he's talking to me and talking to an old lady, right? Like, what even is this at this point? And then, is this real? Is this real, man? Um, and if some of my dreams are to be believed, I'd say I think this is the motherfucking dream world. I mean, on some level. Shout out to one of my favorite Americans, Crazy Horse. Yes, one of the greatest Americans who ever lived, as far as I can tell. Shout out to Crazy Horse. That was one of the ideas attributed to him was the idea that his great powers in battle, his invulnerability in battle, was that he could dream himself into the real world, and that his contention was that when we go to sleep at night, that's actually the real world, and that this is the dream world, which I think it makes a lot of sense personally. But I mean, who really knows? That's part of the fun, right? We don't really know. Yeah, crazy horse respecters. Indeed, indeed. Yeah. And well, and with MAGA in office, I halfway expect people to come in here and start trying to beat me up over calling an engine a Great American. And it was like, well, the U.S. Postal Service did a series, a Great American postal stamp series in the '80s, and they honored Crazy Horse. So I don't know what to tell you, but that's sort of my ace in the hole. And part of me, perhaps fully extricating myself from the. If we're going to use the big words, let's use them correctly. By the way, part of me perhaps fully extricating myself from the so-called truth community. Um, I happened to tune into a live stream, and 5 years on, right, this deep into the game, this far post pandemic, we've got so-called truthers in live streams up all night, drunk as fuck, uh, saying "we" in reference to the United States government and the United States military. Right? Just imagine personally identifying as part of the United States government at this point. Right? I mean, it's just beyond me, and I realized that whether it's attributable to brainwashing or just willful ignorance, or a lack of mental discipline, and an inability to discipline one's mind. And I would say that this person, and many of you know who I'm referring to, is certainly an undisciplined person. That's without question. This is not a man of discipline, which is fine. Most people aren't, and since that is one of my few um, one of the few abilities I'm able to tout is my high levels of discipline. Of course, it would be for me to maybe say something there, but um, I just found it amusing, and I said, to myself, I said, I have to unsubscribe. Like, I can't be watching this. I can't listen to this person. I can't have my thoughts, my mind polluted with the drunken blurtings out of otherwise intelligent people who are now back to referring to what the government does as "we," as if that's a team that can be joined. Right? Now, yeah, go to work and pay your taxes. The bankers need their welfare. The banks and the corporations need their free money for nothing. Absolutely. And then, a smattering of that can be dispersed to the poor, unfortunate, disabled, and afflicted, right? And the elderly retirees via, Social Security. While that, is still a thing, uh, you know, but I can't do it anymore. And it struck me this morning. I said, these are defenders of the system, right? Imagine, this is the brainwashing, and we've talked about before that the truth community is heavily programmed, and it's just a different flavor of programming. But I view this as straight up mind control. This, you know, because it seems to me, and again, all religion is demonic because it is a system of man, right? Like, all systems of man are fully demonic. They're fully corrupt. There's no system of man, and that is, by the way, heaven or hell realm tenet number one, has to do with the fact that humankind collectively is not capable of creating and operating any system that will be free of corruption, fraud, harm, direct harm to people, abuse, of all kinds, and religion certainly falls into that. Um, but the notion of there's at least parts of Christianity, there's parts of the Bible that have to do with a rejection of secular society and a rejection of a lot of these systems of man. And how often do I see people who seem to otherwise subscribe to those beliefs, and they're fully identified with the system, and these are hell realm avengers. I'm putting my name on it. These are the avengers of this hell realm. They will defend it tooth and nail, as long as it seems to be doing what they want it to do, or as long as the rhetoric aligns with the rhetoric that they want to hear. And it's an idea that goes back to Mark Passio. He talked a lot about how these people who seemingly want to reform the system or rein in the abuses of the system, that they actually, all they really want to do is seize control of the system, not to fix it, not to make our lives better. They want to take control of it so they can then operate it in just as authoritarian a fashion, but in ways that they believe benefit them. Right. Which is evil. I mean, that is evil. Now, whether or not these individuals are aware that that's what they're doing, but make no mistake, that is what they're doing. Period. End of story. That is what's happening. And I myself, I realized at a certain point, and this was back during the listening to Alex Jones radio show every day, and then also I took almost an entire year and as a layperson studied the financial system, and as a layperson educated myself on the financial system. And I did not do this by watching YouTube videos, not that there's anything wrong with that. No, I read many books, and I read thousands of news articles, and I read at least 15 entire books. And then it's becoming a bit apocryphal around here, or part of the canon, but I read an entire book on mortgage-backed securities, so much so that to this day, off the top of my head, I can explain to you exactly what a CDO is, a collateralized debt obligation, one of the primary instruments or financial or mortgage-backed securities, that led to the 0809 global financial crisis, right? And in fact, I've realized that if I'm going to continue to speak about these matters, at some point I'm going to have to go back to formalized study of the financial system, and sort of update my knowledge. But who knows at this point? Is it even worth it? Is that even worth my time? Who knows? I can't call it. All right, heaven or hell realm. And again, this is because I don't want to just call it a hell realm. And part of that is I get so much pushback. Although it's mainly people who fall into the hell realm Avengers category for their own, by the way, other than the mind control, for what I've identified to be their own selfish purposes, which again, we're all selfish on some level, or on numerous levels, or perhaps on all levels. So, not that there's anything wrong with selfishness. Is selfishness inherently bad? That could be a topic for a different broadcast, perhaps. But I think heaven or hell realm is perhaps a more apt description, and then with the caveat that seems to be manifesting as a hell realm. So tenet number 3 is that the function of the economic system is to further enrich the wealthiest persons in society every moment into perpetuity. And the economic system never fails to achieve its purpose. Full stop. Now, the way I the way that I myself interface with these ideas, and this is part of my beautiful mind, this is part of my super high functioning retarded person, this is part of my undiagnosed fake autism. whatever we want to call it, when I'm mistaken for highly intelligent, if I am highly intelligent, this is one of the ways in which I am highly intelligent. I now have a concept where I'm able to interface with effectively all of life now, right? That's a lens through which I can approach virtually everything, all conversations, any point somebody tries to make to me, whether in rebuttal to one of my assertions, right? Any time somebody tries to isolate one of my statements and take them out of context, you know, it applies to everything. There's nothing that statement does not apply to, right? That's why it's a tenet of the heaven or hell realm. It applies universally across the board, period. And I don't know how many of these I'm going to identify. I'm already up to number 3, right? Uh, Yippee skippy yay for Benton. Unfortunately, well, fortunately slash unfortunately, I will never be able to turn this into a business, right? And under in America, where we only measure in money and success is only defined in the accruing of money, right? The mind would immediately search to turn this into a business, and myself also used to think that way, and that's something I've trained myself out of. And I started to mention earlier, while critiquing another content creator, um, and I have this bad habit of starting to make a point and then not making that point. And again, back to the disciplining of the mind, I'm training myself out of that habit by putting energy into, when I realize I've failed to make my point, let's go back and make the point. Have I already forgotten it again? Perhaps. Let's see. Yeah, I've noticed back around the time I was learning about the financial system and a lot of these, things having to do with the true nature of the system, I realized that I myself had been propagandized around American exceptionalism, and in fact was quite patriotic most of my life, or much of my life. And I realized that I would reflexively refer to the government as we. I would include myself in that we, or the military, what the military industrial complex was up to, as we, right? And over a period of years, I trained myself out of that. And now it's maybe once or twice a year I accidentally slip up and I'll might say we, referring to the United States, and then I immediately correct myself. But because the individual I was referring to earlier is not a disciplined person, this is, by the way, this is my basis for compassion towards that person. What a miserable state to be forced to exist in because of one's own lack of discipline, an inability to improve oneself over time by realizing, well, that's a mistake to identify with the nation and the power of the nation and the exceptionalism of the nation, which is certainly not a thing, right? That was plausible at one point. Those days have been over with for a long time. I would say uh, Cheney Bush Cheney killed that forever. What do you think, Carl? Or was it already dead? But certainly the Bush Cheney administration, I would say 2 terms of Bush Cheney, certainly at least for the world, if not for the Americans themselves, it certainly ended the notion of this is the best of the best of the best when it comes to nations. Um, Surely. And then, so part of the Hell Realm Avengers, part of this other content creator this late in the game, uh, identifying with perhaps the present administration, identifying with the military might of the United States, identifying with the nationalism and all of these things. Are you going to go back in time and put your name on Bush Cheney? Are you going to go back in time and put your name on, and not you, the listener, my apologies, let me discipline myself. Is he going to go back in time? Because I know how it feels to be sort of lectured for things that I'm not doing. I don't mean you, the listener, so let's not talk that way, Mr. Benton. Is he going to put his name on Abu Ghraib, or however you say that, right? Or would he just say, "Oh well, that never happened," right? Because remember, that was his team, and he's got a team whether he admits it or not. He's on team Trump. He's on team Republican, right? Which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that inherently, but it says something about where the individual is in their development or their lack thereof. And then I can have my own opinions about why is the person still stuck where they were when I first encountered them 5 years ago. Like, why are they still there? I don't know. I thought Alex Jones talked us all out of the left-right paradigm 15 years ago. I didn't realize this was still a thing, but it very much still is a thing, especially amongst this group that I've identified as the Hell Realm Avengers, these defenders of the Hell Realm. Especially when whoever the politicians that are supposedly running the show, supposedly running the show. Of course, even if they are running the show, it's by proxy, right? They're proxies for who? For whoever controls the banks and the corporations. And I'm pretty sure that's going to end up being heaven or hell realm tenet number 4 is going to be that all politicians work directly for banks and corporations, full stop. Meaning that if the time ever comes, and I can't identify a single time that Republicans and Democrats have ever done a single thing that benefited the masses of people in this country. But if it ever, and some would arguably say that there are things underway that will, perhaps debatably benefit at least portions of the masses, in the near future. If that's a thing, to me, that's it's ancillary. It's a byproduct because of what, again, it's not official yet, but it probably will be tenet number 4. Well, okay, but that's because the people who own and operate the politicians, aka a la the banks and corporations, which are also proxies, by the way, they've permitted the politicians to throw the commoners a bone, although, you won't really know. And to mix the metaphors, you won't really understand, is this really a meal of sustenance until one, bites into it, tastes it, and attempts to digest it, right? We won't really know. Um, one will not really know, uh, until some point in the future. Certainly. Oh man! Shout out to the chat. All right, I think I've beaten up on that person enough for now. Although I still reserve the right to go back in for a few more punches if it tickles my fancy. So what I would say about these tenets is that ultimately what I'm realizing is that, in order for me to, and this is not a threat, this is not like throwing down of the gauntlet, this is not a, you know, Benton is starting a cult of personality, and in order to fit in with the cult, one must pretend to believe these things, because make no mistake, that's what will happen. It won't be the disciplining of the mind and the various practices that would lead, I believe would lead the individual to these same realizations uh, that I'm talking about here with these tenets. But what I'm realizing is that, in the long run, I'm not going to be compatible with people who have not fully realized these things to the level of being so disciplined in their thinking on a moment to moment ongoing basis, right? Because even I fall away from some of these tenets, but I immediately go right back to them. And that is the disciplining of the mind, and that is the training of the focus and concentration. Um, and that is meditation on some level, right? That's the meditation in some way is the person realizing, oh, I'm not focused, I'm not concentrating, and then directing their concentration back to whatever it is that they've chosen to focus on. And then, early forms of meditation, that's typically the breath, or it could be like a candle, right? Well, guess what? That can be done with, anything as the object of focus, as far as I can tell, right? And I'm disciplining my mind every single day over a period of many years now, and I'm doing that right now as I speak these words. I'm going to continue to do that, so much so that, as I have these epiphanies, as I have these realizations, and more I've realized that, it's ultimately futile for me to go onto the internet and speak all of this. um Now, I can't say it's futile overall, but it's mostly falls on deaf ears, because I would say it's late enough in the game that if individuals have not developed themselves to the point of being able to come to all of these conclusions for themselves, and some have, by the way, but many haven't, listening to me is not ever going to do it. And in fact, listening to me, I would argue, people are able to trick themselves in some regard, as by the way, as it still hasn't rained. you know uh this is I'm not going to allow this to frustrate me, but I could be walking around doing various tasks. Oh well, I'll be okay. um but whatever positive feelings, whatever people get out of listening to these sort of discourses, it's not a lasting effect, right? It serves really only as motivation. And I'm one of the David Goggins motivation is crap crowd. 'Cause motivation is crap. Motivation can never sustain the individual over the long term, right? The individual must tap into their own source of power, their own source of energy, their own source of, whatever propels the individual forward. It can never be external, because whatever's external will let them down. Um, Now, I would exempt, higher concepts from that, and I don't want to get into a Jesus, God, Most High talk, because I can already see where people's thinking would go. Now, I would counter by saying, well, I connect to that source. I would say that is source in some way, right? And that in fact, I must connect to myself internally first, to then connect, if I'm going to refer to the Most High as source, right? And then what do we even mean by that? That's a whole nother lecture series that I'm not even sure. While I feel like I have a pretty good grasp within myself, I'm not even really sure I understand it well enough to even attempt to convey those ideas to others. And ultimately, what I do talk about on this channel is mostly limited to topics that I am confident in my own understanding enough to attempt to convey, because I realized very early on in my podcasting career, not that it pays me money, but in my podcasting career, that, you know, what ends up coming, into the microphone and through the internet into people's ears is maybe 10% of my own understanding. And then what percent of the 10% is the listener able to take in? So, now we're down to perhaps what, 1% of what's is going on in my mind and my level of understanding. So that's a what order of magnitude? Perhaps 100 to 1, right? And if you want to talk about ego and so-called narcissism and arrogance, I mean, if you can read through the lines of what I just stated, I mean, that's far beyond perhaps anything even Jack Talcott has overtly claimed, right? The audacity, sir. Oh man, I love it. And this is the sort of thing that gets me out of bed in the morning, certainly. Certainly. What's up, Razvan? Good to see you, sir. Well, and spirits, Razvan, and as a former imbiber of the spirits, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about. He says there's a couple of content creators that I won't name, but they're on your screen there. If you're looking at the video, watching my icon vibrate, these two content creators have an alcohol problem, non-problem. Uh, yeah, and that is a good time to remind and play the word games of spirits. And I myself recognize that certainly the abuse of substances absolutely uh, subjects can subject the individual to it's a greater susceptibility to the influence of various spirits, right? Various spirits. Yes, that's right, Carl. Some folks just don't know how to lock in. And then we get to the nitty gritty. Again, now we're back to why, in a former life, I used to hit the gym and I put on a bunch of muscle mass. And at a certain point, I then trimmed down. And I've never been shredded. Well, that's not true. I've never pre illness. I was never shredded. I just don't really have the genetics for it necessarily. Although I guess I could, if I really wanted to sacrifice fully, gotten shredded. But I was certainly lean enough while also having enough mass. Let's say I got fairly lean at 175 pounds, and I now weigh 130. I've gained 15 pounds and I weigh 135. My fighting weight is probably a buck 25 to a buck 30, if you think about it, somewhere in there, uh, at the age of 50. But so I could certainly, a big part of being able to earn one's living as a personal trainer, other than whatever stupid certifications are involved, is how one looks, right? Has a lot to do with it. But then you get into, uh, you know, people, it's well known with personal trainers that a big part of whether or not the client continues is not their progress. It's not the progress the client makes in their own fitness and in how they look in the mirror. It's actually, surprise, surprise, it's how they feel, right? And I'm only ever going to kick the shit out of everything in my path, right? And that's, how do you think I got to that level, right? How did I get to bulking up to 195 pounds and then cutting down to 175 and being relatively lean with a decent amount of mass on me? Certainly not a bodybuilder, but looking pretty good, and you know, uh, getting a lot of attention when I took my shirt off or whatever, and while simultaneously waiting tables at Outback. And then it's like, well, just go be a personal trainer. And this is, by the way, we get back to word of mouth, the word of mouthing. If I was like most people and just allowed myself to be word of mouthed into things, I would have gone and become a personal trainer, and it would not have worked out, because I would have actually, instead of wasting my time and the client's time, I would have wanted to see them make progress. Right. That's just not a thing. Well, I'm not able to come onto the internet and make a business out of, as attractive as my voice may sound at times, and I am complimented on my voice from time to time. And certainly if I planned these broadcasts a little better, and I could lean into the more pleasing tones of my voice, certainly. And I have it in the past, especially in the podcast days, utilize more pleasant sounding microphones and preamps, and instead of yelling into earbuds as I am now, right? There's a lot of things that can be done. Although I'm all natural, even with the weightlifting, I was all natural, and I'm all natural with the voice. I don't believe in any sort of processing, right, of the voice. Um, but I digress from those topics. Um, but I believe you see the point I'm making is, you know, I can't make a business out of just telling people, hey, the only way to really develop the levels of focus and concentration that are going to be required to do this damn thing is you're going to have to, they, one, will have to learn to kick the shit out of themselves, right? Good fucking luck turning that into a business, you know? Good luck with that. That's a non-starter. That's not going to happen. And see, this ties us into the idea of a heaven or hell realm, and heaven or hell realm tenet number three. And let's repeat that. It bears repeating: the function of the economic system, and which also ties into tenet number one, the idea that humankind is not capable of creating and operating systems that are free of corruption, that are free of evil, right? And what I'm trying to say, I'm basically using a bunch of flowery language to say that all systems of man are necessarily evil, even if they don't start that way at day one. They devolve into pure motherfucking evil, every single one of them. And that's why my assertion is this is a hell realm. Although I will be correct and say it could be a heaven realm if every single individual underwent a process like I'm describing of kicking the shit out of themselves enough to develop what would need to be developed to then be able to continuously discipline their own minds, so that then the collective output of humankind would possibly be capable of creating systems free of corruption, right? Which, by the way, I don't even think is possible, but that's my opinion, right? It would be nice to see an attempt, and I would say until the masses fully accept the utter futility of man and his systems, right? Man and their systems. Uh, there's no hope, right? But then again, what have I talked about? That contained within each human being, myself included, is something I've referred to as a hope station, which, by the way, is representative of nothing. External to the human, it's representative of nothing. It's only representative of itself. The fact that I may go choose to have a conversation, you know, with another human being, and that during the course of that conversation, their hope station starts to show. It's representative of nothing other than, oh, that's a human being, and contained within the human being is a hope station. Yeah, guess what? I also have one. I just choose not to pay much attention to it because of these reasons that I've named Hell Realm, Tenet number one, number two. Now we're on to number three, and I'm pretty sure I already know what number four is going to be, although maybe at some point in the future, these may get renumbered. I don't know. So, because of the way American society operates, which is what the national religion is consumerism, meaning that's how Americans collectively worship. And people can claim to be atheists all they want, or people can discuss atheist ideas all they want. Guess what? The masses are not atheists. The masses, God is money. Okay. So, how can we have a populace? You can't have a populace of atheists. It's not possible, because I'm watching you can't have this populace as atheists. It's not possible. God can't die because God is money in this society, right? So God can't be dead, Nietzsche. And I never read any Nietzsche. Now, I don't know if I need to read Nietzsche or not, and I'm sure I'm butchering the pronunciation of that. Somebody on here tried to make fun of me for how I pronounced Dostoevsky. I said, I'm from Arkansas. Do you hear my accent? Like, I should not even be attempting to say these words. Are you kidding me? Like, the levels of humility involved in me even trying to say Dostoevsky, right? I mean, are you kidding me? I can barely speak English in the first place, right? Now I'm going to try to say Nietzsche. Go fuck yourselves, and not you, but the royal go fuck yourself. You know, good God. All right, what was I on about? Right back at you, Jay. I see you down there. What was I just on about? Oh, I got sidetracked on pronunciations. Oh, Nietzsche, God is dead, and all this. Um, de facto, meaning in practice, God is money and the national religion, and these people are worshipers. Americans collectively, make no mistake, are worshipers, and they will do whatever it takes to continue to worship their God, which is consumerism, right? And this system, this heaven or hell realm, whatever power, whatever entity, whatever has seized the power, by the way, via humanity, right? Whatever has seized power via being able to influence humanity, something I would term as Satan, right? Or you can just call it pure unmitigated evil, right? Whatever we're calling it. Uh, um, it knows us better than we know ourselves. It is the world's foremost expert in human psychology, right? And it absolutely uses all of these things against the people. And look at the function of marketing and advertising, right? And that does operate on these religious principles and a literal worship, right? A literal worship of the god of money via consumerism. And then we get to the idea of success. And this is how deep the brainwashing goes. As an American, when we hear the word success, the only thing that comes to mind is making money. That's all, myself included. That's all anybody thinks about. And in fact, one of the most popular, one of the most viewed live streams on this channel, 1.1K views. I might have been the first live stream I ever had go over 1,000 views. I'm pretty sure it was. It's called "This Is Success" because, again, back to the super high functioning retarded person, back to the undiagnosed fake autism. I got accused of being unsuccessful, right? And of course, the first thing we think about is making money. Now, we can get into the whole, I actually can go make about $80,000, if I force myself to drive a truck, for the next 365 days. But even that's, by the way, that's not even a high income. Uh, and there is no middle class. That's not a thing. So, but I could make more than some of the other poor folks. But if we look at the dictionary definition of the word success, it's not money, right? But that's how deep the brainwashing goes. That's all anybody thinks of when we talk about success is, oh, that has to be money, right? Which also means that if the peanut gallery can point at any individual and say, well, where's your money, sir or ma'am? They can just say, well, you're not successful. Therefore, why should we listen to you? Why should we listen to you? You're not successful. You don't have a pot to piss in. Okay. What would Jesus do, by the way? What would Jesus? Now he's comparing himself to Jesus. Well, not really, but I'm making a point, right? Yes, and if Christ himself showed up, that would also be applied to Christ. That would also be applied to Jesus if he showed up in 2025, walking around in sandals, mobbing around, jobless, right? You can call him a carpenter all you want. There's not a lot of biblical accounts of Jesus. Well, there's biblical accounts involving Jesus and nails. There's not a lot of biblical accounts of Jesus doing the hammering now, is there? And now I'm back to, this has to be the dream world. This can't be the real world. It can't be. And I had such a fucking deep, lucid fucking inception dream within a dream within a dream within a dream. It took me a while to figure out if I was even awake or not. Like this thing got so deep. And again, I'm just retarded enough. At a certain point, I thought I was awake and was still fucking asleep. That's how deep this thing went. Shame on the mess. Yeah, the Dow Jones. That's right. That's right, Razvan. And let's remember that something. Let's okay, let's go. Let's talk about finances because I was looking at an article this morning, and the problem with trying to talk about finances is I'll end up talking about politics to a bunch of folks who don't follow politics. And this is a very new thing in society. When I first started listening to Sean Hannity on the radio, I had no fucking idea who Sean Hannity was. And I was on a road trip, and I've always liked talk radio, but preferentially sports, right? But, you know, I was getting to be old enough where I didn't want to just listen to music all the time in the car on a road trip. So I was somewhere, maybe in the middle of Kansas, who knows? Not Iowa, certainly, but middle of Kansas somewhere, perhaps. And because if you go west out of Arkansas, uh, it's Iowa's too far north if you start in Arkansas, but you can start in Arkansas and be on the way to somewhere and go through Kansas. And although I guess it's possible to also go through Iowa, but I digress. Kansas is cold enough for my people, certainly. It's windy and cold enough in the right time of year. But uh, I realized just from listening to Sean Hannity, who was not a household name yet. This is way before this is way before half the country, seemingly. Although actually, in actuality, you're looking at a third or less of the country. When they say half, it's not half because you've got maybe 25 to 33% of the country refuses to be put into one of those two groups, at least on a permanent, ongoing basis. But and I mean the red or blue set tripping, via Republicans and Democrats. And of course, as we know, what this is very remedial, by the way. See that what I'm even speaking on right now, I consider this to be beneath me. Like I feel like I'm lowering myself to even talk in these terms, realistically. But you know, even if folks understood this on some level or already know this, it's like, yeah, maybe people know this, but they're not practicing. I see very few people actually practicing this. I see a lot of folks blaming everything on the Democrats. And I have a memory, and I remember when Bush Cheney was in, and everybody was blaming the Republicans. Everybody in the world was blaming George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, and the Republicans for everything evil. The personification of evil worldwide was Dick Cheney, George Bush, and the Republican Party. And now, fast forward 15, 20 years, however long it's been, now the personification of evil is Biden, Kamala, and the Republicans, and Nancy Pelosi, and whoever else. Well, yeah, the system flipped it, but so fucking what? What's the difference? It's a one-party system. But anyway, I don't even want to get into all of that. But, I hesitate to even go into some of these financial articles because I'll just end up attempting to explain basic politics. But the Sean Hannity example, I wanted to listen to his radio show, right? But I realized at a certain point, he's talking about the Democratic Party and he's talking about the Republican Party. I don't know the difference because I didn't know much about politics, right? At a certain point. And then over a period of time, as a person who's been a reader of the news my whole life, going back to the 80s, I then started paying enough attention to politics to where I figured out the basics. And then at some point, actually became a bit of a wonk, meaning just one who's sort of interested in politics, but more of like as a hobby or almost like a sport, right? A pastime, a game. And the fact is, most of the audience just does not have a background in this because most of the audience only really knows anything about politics other than, maybe their father or their grandfather loved Reagan or whatever, and or before that, maybe FDR or whoever, whatever it was back in the olden days. But, as far as the goings on and the details, the 24-hour news cycle, that was a thing to some extent. And then at a certain point, the boomers are watching, the ones who believe themselves, the middle America boomers are watching Fox News, but then now it's everything's, social media and memes and platforms and, Twitter, the Twitter sphere and all of these things, which I'm not a part of any of that. So I have more of a background in actually, educating myself through reading and some listening to long form. Although I never really became a regular listener of Hannity, that was more of an example of just, and that was who was on talk radio back then. It was all Republican. That was who was on talk radio. With Rush Limbaugh, all of that sort of thing. I'm so loud I can hear somebody out there just yelling, "Shut the fuck up!" Don't you love that? It's supposed to be raining, sir. That's why this is happening. So you're not supposed to be outside hearing me right now and yelling, "Shut the fuck up." Where are your headphones? Of course, it has to be a homeless person. The locals are certainly not allowed to. You know, the wages are certainly not allowed to yell at the top of their lungs, "Shut the fuck up." And of course, with the levels of mental illness and such, it's also possible that that person is just yelling "shut the fuck up" at something other than myself, but probably me. My voice does carry, and then because I'm not able to be outside of the vehicle while I'm inside talking so loudly, I have no idea. I'd like to think that the vehicle muffles my voice, but perhaps it even amplifies it. I don't know. I can't call it. That's funny. And that is another thing. I'm surrounded by folks who would be triggered by just hearing Republican Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh, right? And so this has, been one of my critiques, and I'll bring it back to these Hell Realm Avengers and these people who are now, in the so-called truth community, but they seem to be, identifying with, the system in some way. They are not necessarily triggered, like they don't have Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and Democratic Party um, derangement syndrome, right? Where we have identified, the Trump derangement syndrome, the Elon now the Elon derangement syndrome. We've identified all of these things, uh, but it's a different form of the same thing, arguably, which is it's just a laughing and a ridiculing and a mocking, right? It's in some form, just as long as there's that thing that's there to ridicule and mock, right? It's still the same energetically, it's still the same form, and it still serves the same purpose. So it's in fact the people on both sides, and I don't even like that terminology, but whoever that is who may have been hearing me loudly talk about Republicans, Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh, and yelling at me to shut the fuck up from a great distance, by the way. So could be directed my way, perhaps not. Although there is a body of water nearby, at the risk of doxing my location, that perhaps my voice is carrying across the water. That's certainly possible. And who leaves the house without earbuds or headphones these days is what I would say. Did you leave your earbuds at home? I mean, what happened? Did you lose your charging case? Like, what has happened here? Put your earbuds in like everybody else. I mean, what even is this? But so when I'm able to observe, you know, that if I get off on a jag, and by the way, it doesn't even matter that I'm criticizing, right? The fact that I'm criticizing uh these notions. They just don't want to hear about it at all. They don't want to hear about it, right? Although interestingly, the people who don't want to hear about it are mostly the gentrifiers, right? Now you do have, you got a hardcore group here in Los Angeles, working class folks who, by the way, that's historically Democrats. I don't know if people are aware of that. I guess we are going to talk politics. That's historically, the working class is historically aligned with Democrats. That only recently has that flipped. But, here in a major city, you're of course going to have, you know, Kamala won Los Angeles County, I'm sure, but probably did not win it to as great of an extent as one may think. Trump may have gotten, I don't know, 38% of the vote, 36% of the vote here in Los Angeles County. I don't know. We could Google it, I guess. Is it even that important? Maybe I'll go look at one of these articles I was threatening to read earlier. Maybe that'll get me off of loudly yelling about concepts that trigger derangement syndrome in many of the nearby folks. But again, this was all based on the weather forecast, folks. It's supposed to be raining, meaning there's not supposed to be people milling about to hear what I'm saying. All right, where's this? Let me see if I can find this article. Drudge is updated though. See, that's another problem. Oh, we can go into our history though. Yeah, let's just do that. History. Hmm. I looked at too many articles already this morning. Oh, maybe it's this one. Yeah, Trump. This is a New York Times. Trump promised Americans booming wealth. Now he's changing his tune. And again, I'm not asserting that any of this is accurate or fair or whatever. I'm using this to make points because I already know how it works. People will just go, "Well, that's fake news. That's the left leaning mainstream media." Yeah, of course it is. I'm using it to make points. Uh, as a presidential candidate, Donald J. Trump promised an economic boom like no other. But 8 weeks into his presidency, Mr. Trump, and this is going to tie into what Razvan was saying about the stock market. This is also going to tie into something that during the election, I made this point to the Hell Realm Avengers that, and I'll wait till it comes up in the article, but this is a point again because I follow politics to some extent over a period of many years, because I followed financial matters over a period of many years. I'm able to come to these conclusions without, again, I talked about the masses are not processing data, and the individuals that comprise the masses are mostly people who are dependent upon prepackaged ideas being sent to them through some form of a push notification, right? Whether literal or figurative, right? Whether literally or figuratively, right? Whereas I'm packaging my own ideas for the most part. But 8 weeks into his presidency, Mr. Trump is refusing to rule out a recession. Although I would say that's a false premise, the idea of ruling out a recession. That's sort of already like a political red herring, right? That's sort of that's the others attempting to set up the opposition, right? That's like an obvious ploy, right? So as I read this, I'm able to decode the messaging. Well, that's an obvious ploy. The idea of asking the other to repudiate the notion of a recession, right? Well, you ran on the notion of an economic boom, so now why won't you rule out a recession? Well, I mean, it's so obvious on its face that it's just silliness. And by the way, it also says a lot about where the American people are, in their own thought processes. Uh, Not that they're thinking, but you know what I mean. But 8 weeks into his presidency, Mr. Trump is refusing to rule out a recession, a striking change in tone. And just calling him Mr. Trump is a bit of a diminishment, I would say. He is the president, I mean, after all. A striking change in tone and message for a man who rode a former president, when he was running. Like, so let's go back in time before he was reelected. For a man, no, well, a former president, right? A striking change in tone and message for a man who rode widespread economic dissatisfaction to the White House by promising to, quote, make America affordable again. Well, affordable for whom, right? We don't know who Trump was talking about when he said that. And we've removed the context. See, this is something I'm annoyed when people do this to me. I don't know in what context did he say what you're now quoting him as having said. We're certainly, we're almost assuredly taking his comments out of context. His comments come as the stock market is tumbling. The S&P 500 fell 2.7% Monday after falling 3.1% last week. Well, guess what, folks? When Biden was president, the stock market, meaning the Dow Jones, was up 55 motherfucking percent for the entirety of his presidency. Right. So, based on what some folks look to, Biden did a great job with the economy. Now, anybody who aligns themselves with traditional family values, American exceptionalism, Trump MAGA is going to say, what are you talking about? The price of eggs, inflation, yada, yada, yada. It's like, yeah, that's the basket of deplorables. That's the so-called basket of deplorables. Y'all, that's the people who are supposed to be poor, right? I mean, this is a matter of perspective, okay? To the people who are investors, to the people who buy stocks, to the people who invest in companies, in fact, the economy kicked fucking ass under Biden. I hate to break it to you. And it actually shows, and again, official fiction, right? I don't even believe politics are real, but if we're going to go official fiction and pretend for a moment that politics are real, this shows you just how much of a fucking disaster Kamala was. And, as a person who actually does from time to time enjoy listening to a political speech, I listened. The only speech I've ever heard of Kamala's was her concession speech. And that I was appalled at how horrible. It's just such a it's terrible. It's like, of course she was not the president. And for my own, selfish reasons, I was hoping she would become the president, because I wanted to talk shit to some specific people who hail from a part of Arkansas that I don't hail from. In fact, my home county of Jefferson County, Jefferson County, Arkansas, where I was born and raised, Kamala, it was one of 10 counties in Arkansas that Kamala won. And out of those 10, she did the best in my home county. So, the fact that many of my blood relations have now moved to the part of Arkansas that most closely identifies with Trump, I mean, I don't even really know what to say about that. Again, the part of the country I'm from historically is not Republican. It's Democrat. Historically, it's as hardcore Democrat as you can possibly get, which is what? Po folks. Po folks. His comments come as the stock market is tumbling. Even some Republicans who fear retribution if they cross Mr. Trump have started to raise concerns about, now they're talking about the tariffs over his levies. The moment captures a fundamental challenge for Mr. Trump, a showman who makes absolute and sweeping promises. This is the rhetoric, by the way. When I reference rhetoric, this is what I'm talking about, and they all do it. Who makes absolute and sweeping promises that inevitably run into the reality of governing. And as we know, the reality of his first term was a temporary improvement in the job market, and then the fake pandemic happened. The economy, Mr. Trump, and this is the part that people who don't follow economics and politics over time never seem to fully grasp, because I called it myself when I was live with Drew in the run up to the election. I believe it was early in November when I went on with Chalk Body Outline, I believe on his backup channel. Whether or not that stream is still up or not, I don't know. But I basically said all of this. The economy Mr. Trump inherited was by many standards in solid shape, with low unemployment, moderate growth, and an inflation rate that, while still higher than what the Federal Reserve wants, had declined substantially. And that's not even to mention the fact that the stock market was as high as it had ever been. It was all-time highs for the fucking Dow. So if you look at all the metrics that historically candidates are able to run on, and especially Republicans are able to run on, so the things that MAGA and traditional family values Christians and traditional family so-called and traditional family values, the MAGA crowd and the Republican crowd, the conservatives, again so-called, all of those economic measures that they would tout, if a Bush or a Reagan had done it or a Trump had done it, all of those indicators were sky high when the election happened. But the uncertainty that his policies have injected into the outlook is a jarring contrast with the picture Mr. Trump painted on the campaign trail. Well, surprise, surprise. Guess what, folks? It's a case of a politician making a bunch of promises, and then as soon as they get into office, they don't even attempt to act on those promises. Of course, that's called politics, because they don't work for us. All politicians work for banks and corporations. We will begin a new era of soaring incomes, Mr. Trump said at a rally in October. By the way, I'm sure that's true. We will begin a new era of soaring incomes, but who does we refer to? And now let's go back to heaven or hell realm tenet number 3. The function of the economic system is to further enrich the wealthiest persons every moment into perpetuity. The economic system never fails to achieve this purpose, right? So it probably will be a new era of soaring incomes, but who will be receiving the soaring incomes, right? And something else I've talked about on here was I saw an article where somebody floated the idea of when will we have the first corporation to reach $1 billion valuation while simultaneously having 0 employees? Meaning, when will an entrepreneur figure out how to leverage AI and to, as a solo operator, create and operate a corporation with $1 billion valuation? Now, maybe it's already happened. I don't know. This was like 1.5 to 2 years ago that I first heard about this idea, right? Maybe it's already happened. I don't know. But so this is probably true to some extent. But Joe Sixpack, your run of the mill ham and egger, right? The average bozo that comprises the masses, the underclass in this country, hears we will begin a new era of soaring incomes and thinks Trump is talking to them. Trump don't mean you, partner. And then he says, Mr. Trump said at a rally in October, skyrocketing wealth, millions and millions of new jobs, and a booming middle class. We are going to boom like we've never boomed before. Now, I don't even know there's not going to be a middle class, so what are you talking about? But number 2, while Trump was making those comments in October, at the exact same time, Elon Musk was saying, well, if Trump gets elected, there's going to be a depression. I mean, don't take my word for it. Do your own research. Go find the news article. It's there somewhere. I guess I could find it myself, but I'm trying not to kill my batteries too much because it's 100% chance of rain tomorrow. Today's chance was only 50%, but tomorrow's 100%. So I guess I could have done this tomorrow, but here we are. So while Trump is saying all of this to the ham and eggers, Elon, now at the time I could have juxtaposed Trump's comments with Elon's comments And the ham and egger could have said, yeah, well, that's Elon. Who cares? What's it matter? He's not running for president. Well, now you have some people saying he's the de facto president, which is not, it's not really the case. But with what's going on, again, official fiction via Doge, right? And now Elon's saying, and maybe I'll cover this next. Now Elon's saying that in the first year, that basically Elon said he's going to stick around for another year of Doge, and they're going to cut $1 trillion. Well, I already called it. I already put my name on it. I said, yeah, they're going to, all the money they cut is going to be given to bankers for interest on the debt. And, I haven't studied economics to know this enough to know this, but maybe the government spending has reached the point where there's not going to be enough money to give to the banks for interest on debt unless these cuts happen. Maybe when I talk about that all politicians work for banks and corporations, maybe it's come to the point where the people who own and operate Donald Trump and Elon Musk have to send these guys in to cut enough from spending to give to the banks for interest on the debt. Because believe you me, the banks are going to get their trillion plus this year. No matter who the president is, they're going to get their trillion, just like they got their trillion plus under Biden last year. They're going to get their their 1 trillion plus under Trump. Absolutely. Do not pass. These motherfuckers are going to pass go, and they are going to collect 1 trillion. Believe that. In Luigi, we trust, by the way. If we really trusted in Luigi, something would be done about that. Right. The people have proven who they trust in. Right. Yes, they are. The vow to create an economic boom has come into conflict, at least for now. And remember, the article's being written from the perspective of the underclass or the underserved or the proletariat. That vow to create, or even the people who may still believe that they have an opportunity to become middle class, that vow to create an economic boom has come into conflict, at least for now, with the president's favorite economic tool, tariffs. He promised those two during the campaign, and as economists warn, they are the primary driver of the country's cloudy economic outlook. Well, I also don't. That's not a thing. And anytime you hear the phrase and this is what I mean by, if I wanted to try to make money doing daily content, I could probably just break down these articles in the coding of these articles, which is, anytime you see economists warning about something, well, let's not forget that economists earn their paychecks from the ham and eggers believing in the soundness of the system, right? And this is always, economists never warn of anything except out of their own self-serving biases, right? So this is, what does that even mean? And I don't even agree with this. Now they're trying to say that the primary driver of the country's cloudy economic outlook is these tariffs. Well, again, from what perspective? If we're looking from the perspective of the people who think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread that the Dow was up 55% under Biden, and that might have been Dow plus S&P. I'm not exactly sure, but probably just the Dow, right? The people who said, "Well, look how low unemployment was," right? Again, these are official government numbers. Us in the so-called truth community understand that. Well, those numbers don't really mean anything. It's a bunch of bullshit, artificially, managed, manipulated numbers, right? But the hell realm Avengers, if Trump is going into his second term and unemployment is low and inflation is somewhat high, but kind of under control, which I would argue is the case right now, right? Based on my ability to collect cans and bottles, and still, I've still got 2.5 dozen eggs in the car right now as a homeless person collecting cans and bottles, right? And with the occasional, dono, although that's, surprise, surprise, that's basically stopped since Trump got in office. I guess I could blame Trump for my economics drying up over here. But I have I take accountability for my own where I'm at in my own life, and I'm prepared to go back to living in the streets with nothing if this doesn't qualify. if what I'm doing right now doesn't qualify as living in the streets with nothing. But see, I'm not entitled to donations, and I'm happy to e-beg, but only when I know I will receive donations. The worm is turned, as it were, like the writing's on the wall. So you're going to hear way less e-begging out of me because I'm not going to continue to e-beg when people are not sending me money. I mean, that would be crazy, right? I'm not that, and I'm not desperate anyway. Never will be, at least not to that extent. Um, if I was that desperate, I'd probably be trying to call in a favor or two. Not that anybody owes me anything. Certainly they don't. Hey, now it's going to rain, perhaps. Yeah, but see, now they're going to blame these tariffs. But again, it's I always have to bring it back to heaven or hell realm tenet number 3. The function of the economy is to make rich people richer every moment into perpetuity, and it never fails at this purpose. That's what it's designed to do. So you can see look at the levels of games being played just within one news article. And make no mistake, the intelligence behind the writing of these articles, and I don't mean the author of the article, I mean the intelligence behind the mind control and the programming and the brainwashing and the indoctrination and the education of, if by the way, if a human even wrote this, but it is the New York Times, so it probably was a human being that wrote this. you know Whatever intelligence is behind all of that, it knows what levels of games it's playing, but your average person has virtually no ability to decode these things. And I can't even get through the article. We're like 3 paragraphs in. That's how deep this goes. Who's got time to even do all of this? Well, we've got a Benton who's happy to sleep in a Nissan Versa and uh, in a the belly of the beast in Los Angeles, California, in a major city, and pick up cans and bottles. And you know, if you send him donos, maybe he'll go live a little more often. And although at this point, I'd prefer not to. Honestly, you're actually doing me a favor. Now let's try some reverse psychology. Now you're doing me a favor not donating. Actually, because on a regular basis, I would prefer not to think about these things. I would prefer not to break down these articles. That vow to create an economic boom has come into conflict, at least for now, with the president's favorite economic tool, tariffs. He promised those two during the campaign. And as economists warn, now here comes the fear. Oh, the smart people that we've emboldened to do all of this analysis and to give everybody advice and to wring their hands when things are going wrong. They're warning, they're worried, they care about the fucking commoners. They are the primary driver of the country's cloudy economic outlook. Bullshit. Sure, they're not. No, that's not the case. That's simply untrue. Now, we can talk about the fact that, I don't know enough about economic theory, but from what I understand, that the conventional wisdom is that in a global economic system, which, like it or not, America is a part of the global economic system, so much so that, when you go to the grocery store, if you go to Walmart and you pick up a beef steak and it says product of USA, well, it turns out that America got sued at the World Trade Organization, and that meat doesn't have to be from America to say product of USA. So we're in a global economic system, whether you like it or not. But you know, economic theory apparently involves tariffs, not being good for a country in the long run. But again, I don't know. It's not my wheelhouse. In fact, I believe it's Bex who claims to be trained in such matters, although I rarely, if ever, hear her addressing such. But apparently, that's what her big brain was attuned to during her formal education. Uh, yeah, just imagine if she could act right. How much money would she be making? She could, if she was American, she could be a Trump advisor, right? If you think about it. Bex for White House advisor. We're getting notifications of true crime live streams. I'm sacrificing. Anyway, no, I'm not actually. But the forecasts from both J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs say a recession over the next year has become more likely because of Trump's tariffs. Well, again, as a reader of the news, it was already they were already signaling that a recession was. And what does that even mean at this point? I mean, if you're a common American, your life is a recession. Your life is an economic recession. Like, what are we even talking about at this point? Again, we're mostly talking about the stock market. You know, during in a recession, you know, a big function of a recession is you're not going to be able to have the Dow at all time highs, right? You know, that's realistically what we're talking about here is the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the DJIA, the DJIA, right? Not the DJM, the DJIA, truthers. So far, the president appears to be trying to lower expectations. In an interview that aired Sunday on Fox News, Mr. Trump demurred when asked by Maria Bartiromo if he expected a recession this year. And my daddy was day trading, watching MSNBC back when Maria Bartiromo was still doable. By the way, that's how far back I go with some of these news, some of this news. The mid '90s. Who was that one guy? It was Maria Bartiromo and a couple of guys. I can't remember their. Surprise, surprise! I remember her and I don't remember them. I hate to predict things like that, he said. There is a well, and this is just a politician being a politician. I mean, there's just all this is. There is a period of transition. That's the truth. Now, I believe what's they're talking about here is the AI. Yeah, absolutely. There's a period of transition because what we're doing is very big. And remember, Donald Trump is a politician and works for banks and corporations. So that's what he's talking about is what the banks and the corporations are doing is very big. And I believe what he means is via the AI. We're bringing wealth back to America. Well, if that's true, what's he talking about? He's talking about something he was talking about before the election, which had to do with at one point he was speaking on how much electrical power and the cost of the electrical power to power these supercomputers that are supposedly operating this AI. We're bringing wealth back to America. That's a big thing. And when he says wealth, he doesn't mean the ham and eggers, the proletariat, the working class, and their paychecks. He means the banks. He means the corporations. And by the way, we're bringing wealth back to America. Did you know that the 5 wealthiest banks in the world, not a single one of them is in America? So I think that's what he's talking about. They're all in where? China. So when Trump says China, what do you think he's talking about? He's talking about that the 5 largest banks in the world are all in China. So when he says we're bringing wealth back to America, maybe that's what he's talking about. That's a big thing. And there are always periods of it takes a little time. It takes a little time, but I think it should be great for us. Who's us? He don't mean you because he's not a member of the proletariat. He's not a member of the working class. He's not a member of the underclass. He's not a member of any of this. He's part of the people that heaven or hell realm tenet number 3 applies to. The function of the economic system is to further enrich the wealthiest persons every moment into perpetuity. The economic system never fails to achieve this purpose. Not for a single moment in the entirety of your life does it ever fail to do that. So that's obvious what he's talking about here. But of course, this is weaponized through the programming and the mind control and the inability of the American populace to think for themselves. Of course, they think that he's talking to them, and of course, he thinks they're talking about their paychecks. And what is this, by the way? These people who are allowing themselves to be fooled into this, it's Reaganomics. This is trickle down economics. It's the idea that if we bring these, if we bring all of this back to America, these big banks, these big multinationals, you know, if we have the affordable electricity for the AI, and the idea of supposedly one of China's fucking AI algorithms is apparently able to run on, way more Spartan hardware or whatever was in the news recently, and that fucked up the valuation of Nvidia because and that had a lot to do with the stock market being up 55% under Biden was, companies like Tesla. And then of course, companies like Nvidia. And a lot of that had to do with these GPUs, these graphics cards. A lot of this, the current AI runs on this fucking GPUs. And then if China can show what their, I think it's Open AI or whatever they call their version, whatever is the leading version in China. Well, if it runs on if it runs on half the hardware, now overnight, Nvidia stock, goes down so much that their billionaire, founder or whoever is, his wealth, suppose his paper wealth goes down by, 100 billion overnight or whatever happened, you know. And if you don't understand this well enough to go live yourself and explain it, what are you going to tell me? You know, and why don't you? And why? And again, if I'm not talking to you, I'm not talking to you. And I really feel bad sometimes for going off on the audience, but just, I feel like people could do a little better. I really do. But anyway, how deep are we in this? I don't think I want to chew the batteries up much more than this. That's right. That's right. Yeah, just never watch Jim Cramer, and then you'll be all right. That's right, Carl. In his speech last week to a joint session of Congress, Mr. Trump acknowledged that tariffs would cause a little disturbance. But he said, we are okay with that. It won't be. Of course they are. The banks and corporations are always okay with the underclass suffering because, as we know, heaven or hell realm tenet number one, humankind is not capable of creating and operating systems that are free of corruption, that are free of suffering. So, look, from the perspective of the system, the little guy is suffering anyway. When is Donald Trump ever not okay with the little guy suffering? Even as markets sink, world leaders revolt, and business leaders speak out. By the way, that's all. None of that's happening. That's all a bunch of nonsense. Talk about loaded terminology. Even as markets sink, world leaders revolt, and business leaders speak out. What a bunch of malarkey. Mr. Trump has made clear he has no plans to shift his tariff strategy. This is fucking nonsense. It's a bunch of hogwash. He imposed broad tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China last week and has vowed to move ahead with more next month. But Mr. Trump, who has a penchant for changing positions on a whim, already reversed course on some of the tariffs and could do so again. And this is all well known. I mean, this is just the left leaning media, the leftist media, holding his feet to the fire to some extent. Look, our country has been ripped off for many decades, for many, many decades, and we're not going to be ripped off anymore, Mr. Trump said on Fox News. Yeah, I'm sure that's true. But again, he doesn't mean the little guy. He's talking about the banks and the corporations. He's not talking about the little guy. He's not talking about your paycheck. He's not talking about your retirement fund. And then I want to end on this. Since President Trump was elected, industry leaders have responded to President Trump's America First economic agenda of tariffs, deregulation, and the unleashing of American energy with trillions in investment commitments that will create thousands of new jobs. Kush Desai, a White House spokesman, said in a statement. President Trump delivered historic job, wage, and investment growth in his first term and is set to do so again in his second term. And I said, who is this White House spokesman, Kush Desai? Who is that? So I Googled him and I went to his Wikipedia page, and he's a graduate of Dartmouth who knows about such matters. And it probably is a meritocracy, and he probably did such a good job of going to college and learning what he needed to learn as the And what was his motivation to do so? Well, his parents immigrated here from India. Surprise, motherfucking surprise. So he was highly motivated to do what Ramaswamy Vivek was talking about recently. And Vivek more or less got canceled for trying to call out white Americans and black Americans and saying, look, how y'all living ain't getting the job done. More or less, to paraphrase Vivek, Vivek said, y'all fucking ham and egger white and black Americans who are from here, y'all need to start learning your math and your economics because when Trump becomes president, Kush Desai is going to have to be his spokesman because y'all don't got your book learning. Y'all ain't in there with your three R's, Padna. And Vivek more or less got canceled. And after after Sam Hyde did Dear Elon, he did Dear Vivek, right? And it's a farcical. It's a fucking farce. Okay. And it probably is a meritocracy on that level because what if Trump was actually going to live what if he was going to live his rhetoric and he hired some version of EBT or TBE to be White House spokesman on the economy, right? What would then happen? Surely that would not work out for anybody, right? We need in some jobs we need people who actually understand what in the fuck's going on. And I don't know, I guess we could import Bex other than that, but she's neurodivergent and can't act right, you know. But God bless her. I can't either. It's one of my favorite things about her. Thank God she can't act right, you know. It's probably one of her most redeeming qualities, in fact. But there's a reason why, folks. And that of course Trump, he can't practice what he preaches. And we got to cancel Vivek for speaking the truth and saying, "Hey, if you think America is going to compete globally without bringing a bunch of people here from other countries, that the only way to do that is to is for white and black Americans who are from here to go back to the three R's and to put their fucking nose to the grindstone in academia, right? No, it's not going to happen. The motivation ain't there, right? It's not there. It's just not a thing that can happen. That's right. Elon loves him some H-1B engines. Thanks for watching. Bye.